All right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I am Andy Mack. The first major cabinet shakeup under this second term of President Trump, as he announced today that Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is out, and he has named that successor being Oklahoma Republican Senator Markwayne Mullin. But this is a major development there inside of the Trump administration, inside that inner circle, as Kristi Noem's departure, the first stunning turnaround for a close ally of the president who is tasked with steering the centerpiece of the policy of mass deportations. She recently faced questions arising over her spending at her department and over conduct in the aftermath of the shooting deaths of two protesters in Minnesota earlier on this year. So we're following closely here on Live Now from Fox. She also posted on social media talking about this. Thank you to the president for this, appointing me to the Special Envoy for the Shield of Americas. They're incredibly leaders. I look forward to working with them closely to dismantle cartels that have poured drugs into our nation and killed children and grandchildren. All right, let's continue on here on Live Now from Fox. Bring into the conversation, friend of the program, White House correspondent for Politico, Sophia Cai. Sophia, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And there were a lot of moments that people felt that it might be time for President Trump to step in and move Noem aside. Why specifically was this the time, and was there any moment or movement behind it?
Yes, absolutely. So this was a long time coming, but the moment that really broke it for Trump was when Senator Kennedy was questioning Kristi Noem at a hearing and asked her, did you get approval from President Trump to spend $220 million on ads paid for by the American taxpayer that really featured her very prominently on horseback. It was filmed at Mount Rushmore, and she said yes. That appeared not to be true, as President Trump privately got very upset. And that was the thing that really broke the camel's back, if you will. But, over the past 4, 5, 6 months, Republican frustrations with Kristi Noem have built because she's in charge of a large department, right? The killing of Alex Preddy was one thing. There's also mismanagement at CISA. There's also concerns about the slashing of the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Office, which has been slashed under DOJ. And under this current admin, and you see some very conservative members voicing their frustrations.
Yeah, that is so very true. And we heard from Kennedy at that, and he loves to use that colorful language. I believe it was the quote, he was as mad as a murder hornet, referring to President Trump about some of those comments and looping him in on that ad revenue. Can we get into more of it? Because it was a heated moment, and it wasn't just Democrats at this hearing that were grilling her, and it was Thom Tillis, it was John Kennedy. Can you explain a little bit more about this? Because she was in the spotlight for a lot of the wrong reasons over the last couple of days.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for other Republican senators like Thom Tillis, the frustration has been over her disaster response. She's in charge of FEMA, which is responsible for grants and helping states after hurricanes. And there's been, one rule that she has had when she came and took over, which she needs to sign off on everything that's over $100,000. And of course, a lot of the disaster grants are over $100,000. And one thing that Thom Tillis has been upset about this past year has been how slow it's taken for her to approve disaster grants for his state. That's one thing, of course, he's brought up, her telling of the way that she shot one of her own dogs that was misbehaving. That was something that President Trump was concerned about on the campaign trail in 2024 when Kristi Noem was in contention for VP. And arguably, that was the thing that ruled her out. That along with concerns around Corey Lewandowski, when asked during this during this hearing on the Hill, whether or not she has slept with him, she couldn't say so one way or the other. That's pretty telling. And for DHS insiders, her relationship with Corey Lewandowski has been a concern. The way that he's so heavily involved as a special government employee has been a concern. And we know that President Trump spoke with Corey Lewandowski as well and really asked for some answers of what was his role in choosing who to award these contracts to. So, there's a lot going on with DHS, with Secretary Noem at the head of it. And, now we are sort of preparing for a new chapter of Markwayne Mullin.
Yeah, we'll see what comes of that. But you noted some of the moments along the way, and it has been in the spotlight because it was such a centerpiece of President Trump, this immigration policy, the securing the borders movement. Democrats coming out and saying this is not necessarily all about personnel, it's about policy as well. What are other lawmakers, especially Democrats, saying? Obviously, they potentially don't mind if Noem's gone, but they're more concerned about policy, right?
They're definitely concerned about policy. And look, Democrats are going to have an opportunity to ask Senator Markwayne Mullin his views about how the agency should be run, how deportation plans will be carried out, what sort of procedures will be in place when DHS agents go into states. And you'll continue to see somebody like Tom Homan really heavily involved. There was trouble brewing already for Kristi Noem when, after the shootings in Minnesota, President Trump sent Tom Homan over to Minnesota because this is someone who is liked by both sides. He served under Obama and he's just well respected. I think you already saw some Democrats, including Senator Fetterman, they've said that they would happily vote for Wayne Mullin for DHS secretary. So that's good news for him.
Yeah, we also heard that it was Senator John Kennedy that may have floated the name Mullin to President Trump about this. And he's going to have to go through the process. He's going to have to be Senate confirmed to get into this role inside of the cabinet. And today, Senator Mullin said it was a surprise, but not a big surprise that this all came to be. What are we hearing so far from Mullin, and what challenges might be presented in that nomination process?
So one of the big challenges for him, I think, is he will have to answer for, what happened under Kristi Noem, whether it was the shootings, whether it was deportations, whether it was, how are you going to prevent the same thing happening with the awarding of grants to, the husband of an aide, right? Like these are things that really upset Democrats and Republicans. And I think for some senators, this will be one of their only opportunities to really have another nominee and press for questions, right? Even if they're just looking for the 15-second clip, I think, the senator will face some tough questions. He will have to come very prepared for it. President Trump has said by the end of the month that the senator would take over. So, that's sort of the timeline we're looking at. But, one thing about Senator Markwayne Mullin is that he's going to be able to handle some of the criticism, the future criticism that comes from Republicans, from his colleagues, because, right, he can just call up his former colleagues and sort of, have some authority, have some collegiality as a former senator and talk to them now in his new position as DHS secretary.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Noem did not have that coming from the governor of South Dakota. You mentioned it's going to be a new chapter if Mullin gets in this position. How might the Department of Homeland Security look different with him as secretary?
Well, for one, you won't have Corey Lewandowski. I've heard directly from sources when members of Congress have called over with concerns over a certain aspect of how an agency was run, that part of the agency would then hear from Corey. And he was clearly this person who was so involved in every aspect of DHS in a way that, put a lot of people off. I think, from a management perspective, the bar is so low that, I think people will be relieved to be led by someone who will be more professional about that and will not have sort of a sidekick SGE who she may or may not be sleeping with. So that's one of the biggest things. And then I think, there's going to be an expectation that the senator won't be as all about himself, right? Secretary Noem, when she came in, she would go on these immigration raids, and she would take these photos that she would immediately post, and she featured herself in these DHS ads, and it's sort of like whoever's in that position for President Trump will have to be very focused on executing Trump's mission of those deportations and focusing on the immigrants who have criminal records. And that'll be the thing that determines whether the senator is successful or not. And most importantly, you cannot be invoking the president's name and that's really the thing that that led to Kristi Noem's failure, which is the thing that the president has no patience for is if you are benefiting personally from his presidency or his brand and you may be dishonest about it. So we don't expect to see that from the senator when he comes in. And so, I think, look, the bar is pretty low for him. We expect him to be more successful than Secretary Noem.
Yeah, Noem was so in the spotlight, not only that $200 million ad campaign that is such under scrutiny, but also we saw her in Central America at CCOT at some of these kind of deportations, and she was very visible, very out in front of all of these. And we do know that she's not necessarily fired. They're just reshuffling this around, as she's going to be now the special envoy for the Shield of the Americas, a new security initiative that was said to focus on the Western Hemisphere. What exactly is that, Sophia?
I think, look, in this event that'll happen this weekend, we're hearing it'll be very similar to a Board of Peace event. It'll be a show of force across the, these Latin American leaders, and President Trump will be there. And I think it's sort of his strategy of dominance in the Western Hemisphere, right? The President Trump has decided that America first, also means being strong and uniting the Western Hemisphere. So I think that is sort of the goal. It's a pretty lofty goal as far as substantive policy changes. We're not hearing of any just yet. Of course, the president is very busy with the war in the Middle East. And he said today, when his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, was around, he said, well, Cuba is another place where they may be looking for regime change. But he even mentioned that Marco Rubio said, why don't we finish up with Iran first, right? He noted that nations who try to do too much typically are not very successful. So I think, as much as President Trump likes to be involved in a lot of things at once, he recognizes that there's a war that he has to handle in the Middle East, which, one could argue he did start.
Yeah, obviously still a lot in terms of that priority, what's going on in the Middle East. My last question, Sophia, before I let you go, because we saw after the killings of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, the criticism that came down over DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, then DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, and she was sidelined at a cabinet meeting. She did not speak. President Trump did not call on her. Now he's giving her potentially another opportunity. Is Kristi Noem still in good standing with the president? Is this an opportunity for her to potentially tighten with Trump to get back in that inner circle?
I think she's going to have to keep a low profile for a little while and just show that, she can do the job without causing too much chaos, right? I think the president really has a pretty high tolerance for all sorts of drama, right? Another cabinet member, Secretary Lutnick, we had some reporting that he is someone who is not always well liked, and he showed up in the Epstein files. But I think the president has a lot of patience until he doesn't. And so I think Kristi Noem definitely in her new role will have to really prove herself, and she will be working under Marco Rubio. It'll be a different agency. It'll be a different set of people, and hopefully she will be able to have a fresh start working with Rubio in that new role. But right now she's not in very good standing with Republicans or Democrats.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. And as Kristi Noem, we know she may be out of the spotlight right now, but she could present herself soon enough. She's not going necessarily anywhere, just to a new role there under this shield there for the Americas. All right, Sophia Cai, thank you so much. I appreciate your time here on Live Now.
Thanks, Andy.
All right, thanks so much. All right, great conversation discussing the latest as they are replacing Kristi Noem there as DHS Secretary. They have tabbed Republican Senator Markwayne Mullin from Oklahoma to be her successor, and that will have to go through the nomination process, have to go through the Senate, as they do hold the Republicans a majority in that body. So we'll see if there's anything in line with what's going on today. We also saw as Markwayne Mullin returning to Washington, D.C., or the White House, or the Capitol Hill, I should say, earlier on today. He was greeted by a throng of media members. And he did speak briefly here earlier about this potentially decision, what he might instill as the next member of the cabinet if it so goes through the Senate. Let's listen into these brief remarks.
Give her a call in just a second. Our families are very close, and this happened very quick. So we're gonna go have a conversation with her in just a second.
Did the president say anything about what he would like you to do in this job that Noem is not?
I will never discuss private conversations. Never have. I'm not going to do that now either. But we're super excited about the opportunity, and we're going to do the best we can. We're going to get Department of Homeland Security making sure that we stay focused on protecting the homeland. And no matter if you support me, you don't support me, I'm going to be laser focused on getting that done.
Senator, I just want to really quick, what was your first reaction to just the news that you were nominated for this position, just amidst everything that's happening?
Humbling, because I had to call my dad, and because it happened quick, right? I had to call my wife, call my dad, both, and it's just pretty humbling when you start thinking about it. A little kid from West Oklahoma gets to serve in the president's cabinet. That's pretty neat. So thank you guys.
How did you find out? Via the truth?
And I think I just like a really initial question. I mean, there's so many things that's happening within DHS. What would be your main objective or goal?
We got we're gonna get focused on that, and we'll get back to you on certain details.
Yeah.
When do you expect to be confirmed?
Were you surprised, Senator?
The phone call I got from the president was right before the statement went out.
Okay, thank you.